Shalom and welcome to another episode of Jerusalem Studio. Under heightened international pressure, the Islamic Republic of Iran appears to strike back in several ways, not all of them overt. Following the attack on the Saudi oil facilities some 2 months ago, Tehran has taken several steps in the nuclear domain, inching towards a clear violation of its commitments under the 2015 Multilateral Atomic Accord. Is this a sign of more trouble to come or a mere power play before a potential diplomatic move? To discuss this matter, we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Menachem Erchavi, who is a research fellow at the Truman Institute at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Welcome. I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and Dr. Yossi Mansharov, who is an Iran and political Shiite Islam expert at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and the Esri Center at Haifa University. Welcome. Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the latest developments pertaining to Iran.
You know, we are all familiar with the term SIGINT, signal intelligence, which usually refers to electronic signals being picked up by your own intelligence service, as distinct from human intelligence. But I would like to put forward another proposal, that what we see now with Iran is another sort of SIGINT, signals that Iran is sending and that we have to decipher. And what you referred to are two kinds of signals. One was the attack on the Saudi oil facilities, as well as on tankers in the Persian Gulf or the Gulf of Oman. And the other one was the so-called scaleback, inching slowly towards contravening the JCPOA by enriching more uranium, putting into operation more centrifuges, reopening plants which were sealed after the agreement came into force, probably harassing inspectors sent by the IAEA. These are all signals to the international community that Iran is willing to negotiate, but not from a position of weakness. It is willing to re-enter diplomacy, but not in a form which will make it appear to the Iranian population as if it gave in to pressures by the Trump administration.
Dr. Merchavi, last week, the Islamic Republic took the fourth step of its scale back. It's declared scale back after 60 days or 65 days of ultimatum, starting its enrichment of high-grade uranium, of course, the various mechanisms surrounding that in the underground Fordo facilities, and established another deadline. Once again, not many people speak about this, but they established another deadline of 65 days in which they will once again scale further back, or I don't know to what degree can you scale further back from where they're already doing it, but they're continuing to withdraw from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the technical term for the nuclear agreement, of course, and have now, according to a discussion that I had with Oli Heinonen, who was the Deputy Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency and held both the Iran and Iraq portfolio during 2003, when Iran was, and it's proven, lying about its nuclear program. They are now at a breakout capacity of between 6 to 9 months, something that, of course, indicates a breakout capacity to establishing nuclear weapons. To what degree does the international community look at this and realize that, okay, the time for diplomacy is over, now is the time to enter into other means? Those means can relate to other aspects, of course, than the military one.
Well, I think if I try to put myself in the shoes of Iranian decision makers, I think their self-confidence is bolstered on this front by the fact that the U.S. is entering elections year, and that means I think they understand that limits the amount of maneuver that the American president has, and also the fact that so far the U.S. administration has not shown a very, I would say, aggressive policy towards Iran, maybe in words, but not in deeds. Actually, the U.S. policy in Syria, I think, has also pushed Iran for more, call it courage or audacity to move out of the nuclear deal. Even though I do think that at the bottom line, Iran would still prefer a better deal and to go back to negotiations, but it does edge a little bit farther in order to try to show that it's willing to go really all the way to the edge.
Dr. Mansarov, I'd like to get your take on this, specifically at the time when earlier this week we hear the German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas speaking about Europe contemplating the need to maybe even go back to the UN Security Council and establish the snapback of sanctions that will cripple Iran's economy far more than what it was pre-2015 when the agreement partners, because they didn't ever sign the agreement, came and moved forward UN Security Council Resolution 2234. Ultimately, this situation is a little tricky for the regime in Tehran, and they didn't really expect the Europeans to take such a decision.
Actually, Khamenei is well aware of the weakness of Europe. He is well aware of the divisions between Europe, Russia, and the Americans. So Khamenei actually took the risk and knew that it would not affect the European stance, the European position. We hear only words, not deeds, by the Europeans, and that's why Rouhani, Soleimani, and Khamenei are all expected to accelerate their activities, whether in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, and also in the nuclear field, of course.
Not to forget, of course, the Chinese that have signaled their dismay with the Iranian scaleback, but at the same time, they're also accusing the United States for responsibility because of its withdrawal from the multilateral pact. To what degree do you think that this situation will result in the ability to return to diplomacy, or is there something here that we're not aware about?
It seems that actually Tehran is relying on this backing of China and Russia in order to make more nuclear actions. Also in the region, they will attack, I assume, Saudi Arabia again, as we saw 2 months ago. It seems that they are more encouraged to resume this kind of activities, also in nuclear field and in the region. It seems that actually Russia is backing Tehran in order to halt the American influence in the region.
Mr. Oren, last week on Monday, we heard Ali Akbar Salehi, who is the head of the Iranian nuclear organization, saying that he thanks the world powers for giving Iran enough time to develop into the more advanced centrifuges, the R6 or something like that, giving a hint to the international community that even though you're trying to stop the Islamic Republic from attaining its achievement, even though they never declared the achievement or the goal of Tehran, they are heading towards a breakout point of at least 6 months, something that obviously the United States is very wary about, and the rest of the world for that matter. How can you see this hints emerging more and more from Iran saying, we're going to continue with our program, with our project, and whatever you claim to be able to do, you won't stop us?
For all practical purposes, Iran stopped its real quest for nuclear weapons some 16 years ago, 2003, for fear that the American invasion of Iraq will not stop there. And Iran,
which we know about.
Yes, but as far as we know, and all the intelligence assessments, the 2007 National Intelligence Estimate, and all the rest reflect the assessment of Western intelligence agencies that Iran has indeed, out of fear, not out of any idealism, stopped its quest, but of course has the capability to break out. Now, for Iran, it doesn't make sense to go for nuclear weapons when it knows that either the United States or Israel will attack it and will try to prevent it from getting it. What it does want to do is make those moves which make it appear as if it can reach the nuclear threshold, and then capitalize on this to get other gains. This is what happened in the JCPOA. In return for agreeing to stop what it was doing on various fields, but not on the ballistic missile field or on the other activities in the region, Iran was supposed to get economic incentives. And even now, even if we have another version, another iteration of the JCPOA, it will also be a sort of a buyout or a bribe to Iran not to do what it didn't want to do anyway. Now, with technologically advanced weapons, which are sub-nuclear, such as cruise missiles, with precision warheads, it doesn't need nuclear weapons. They are only a burden to it. But it does want to remain in a position of prestige and of deterrence vis-a-vis other powers. And it is not going to be so foolish as to really break out, but it wants other people to believe that it could.
I'd like to enter into the world of shadows, as you will, where the intelligence agencies conduct their business. We're quite familiar with some of the operations that happen behind the scenes that not always is public knowledge. Nevertheless, the continent that everybody refers to as weak is the one who unveiled Iran's nuclear aspirations and its pursuit of a nuclear weapon at a time when Israel and the United States weren't able to do so, something that ultimately also forced the United States under President Obama to establish the various sanctions regime and so on.
The Netherlands, Germany, and other
and
services.
some islands more to the west.
Okay.
To what degree do you think that at this stage the Europeans, as well as other intelligence agencies, are making extensive efforts in order to try and unveil Iranian intentions, very much alike to what Israel has done at the Tehran facilities or warehouse, which the Iranians later jokingly claimed was a factory of some garments or carpets?
Well, this was, of course, just a wink towards the Israeli claim some 50 years ago that what they have at Dimona was a textile factory. The most intriguing news to come out of Israel, but almost no one paid attention to it because Israel is such a producer of news all the time that this was not considered headline stuff, is that a few days ago, the Israeli military held a joint exercise with Cybercom, the cyber command of the Pentagon. And why is this so important? Because obviously the response for whatever Iran is doing does not have to be kinetic. You don't have to look for a fleet of bombers taking off from bases and hitting targets in Iran. Perhaps if you only push enter on your computer, or not yours, someone's computer, the lights will go out in Fordow and Natanz and other places.
Dr. Merhavi, how do you perceive this?
I look mainly at what hinders Iran from moving forward. And the irony is, I think, that what really holds Iran today from going farther to the edge is our inner Iranian matters. There's I would call it almost a witch hunt now in Iran about facade, about corruption. Everybody is blaming everybody else for corruption, but it mainly comes from the office of the president's office towards. He says it of course in very vague terms, but it's pretty obvious who he's pointing the finger at. The circle's closer to the Supreme Leader, Revolutionary Guards, and veterans of that. And I think that it's not that it affects directly decisions about the nuclear program, but I think overall, the Supreme Leader does get all the feedback from out there, and I think it does affect at least the timing. So, for example, this would be a very bad time for the Revolutionary Guards, the way it might be perceived, to push Iran towards a head-on collision with a big power, because they're already quite blamed for being irresponsible with public money. That's one thing. I also think that the recent unrest in Lebanon and Iraq is also, again, it's not something that's devastating to Iran, but it's a big embarrassment. These countries, the more Iran is involved in them, they seem to go spiraling down. And I think that is another thing that halts Iran from going more brazenly towards a collision.
Also, regarding Menachem's first point, the State Department has designated 9 senior people of Khamenei's close circle, and they can have no access to the funds which they have smuggled out of Iran.
Yeah.
Indeed. Dr. Mansharov, your take on all of this?
Yes, I think that actually Khamenei regards nuclear capabilities as an insurance card of the regime. This insurance card guarantees the survival of the regime. We have a document of the IAEA from '84 when Khamenei was the president that he said to the military officials, once we have a nuclear bomb, we will be able to do whatever we want because no one will dare to do something to us. So even against the Iranian opposition, of course, even against Israel and the United States, Khamenei wants military nuclear capabilities despite the so-called nuclear fatwa, which religiously forbid this kind of bomb. But we can never know. I see that Trump administration has no plan B. We knew that the maximum pressure campaign would resulted in the aggressive campaign of Khamenei. What was the plan B of Trump? We see no plan B. That's the main problem that we face now in Iran and the region.
With regard to your first point, not to forget, of course, that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is the spiritual leader of the Shiites within the Islamic Republic, and he can interpret the fatwa with regard to forbidding nuclear weapons.
The unseen fatwa.
The unseen fatwa.
My
indeed.
wish is your fatwa.
Mr. Oren, to what degree do you think, and I know that you don't think that the Islamic Republic needs nuclear weapons at this point. It's not a rational thing to do, but not everything that Iran does seems to be rational. To what degree is the international community adamant to bring Iran, let's take it one step further, to its knees when it comes to its nuclear aspirations?
It certainly is. This was the whole rationale between the diplomatic effort which started some 15, 16 years ago by the so-called EU3, Germany, Britain, and France, to try and hold Iran back and convince it that it is against its interests in various ways to go nuclear. The international community fully understands that it will not stop with Iran, that Saudi Arabia, especially under Mohammed bin Salman, will go nuclear, that Turkey under Erdogan will go nuclear, and we will have a nuclear race which can get out of hand. But the Iranians want to have it both ways. They want to indicate to the world that they may break out and do something similar to what North Korea did in the 1990s, and also claim that they don't have any nuclear weapon. It's a very, very risky game because one can err on the conservative side, which is what happened with the Americans and Saddam Hussein. Saddam did not have a nuclear weapon, but he wanted the West to believe, the West and Iran, to believe that he does. And eventually, he was too smart for his own good because the Americans believed him. They thought that their intelligence regarding his nuclear weapons was accurate. It was not, but through no fault of their own. And the result was the invasion of Iraq. So if Iran plays it too cleverly, it may end with the same result.
And clearly you cannot deter the Rome of the 21st century. Dr. Merchavi, the moment we look at Iran in the course of the last 3 years, the Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad fighting alongside Iran and its proxies, and with Russian aerial support, has made the gains necessary in order to give Iran plenty of leverage in the war-torn country. The situation in Iraq, of course, with Shiite Muslim government in place, and the Hashd-e-Shabi, the popular mobilization forces, which are receiving both financial support as well as other directives from the Ayatollahs and the Revolutionary Guards, specifically the Quds Force and Soleimani. The situation in Yemen, and everything seemed to fall into line with Iran's regional policy. Since the United States pulled out from the nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions on the Ayatollah regime, we see one after another falling apart, bringing to question to what degree is the U.S. economic sanction regime, pressure campaign, actually impacting Iranian ability to actually fulfill its regional policies, which seem to fall apart.
Well, I do think that the U.S. pressure does have an important effect. Actually, President Rouhani just yesterday, if I'm not wrong, he just actually had an announcement in this regard that says, it's very hard to run the country like we should or something. It was a very, again, he says things in a very general way, but he's actually pointing the finger at the people who push Iran for more conflict with the West. I think that's the message, and these people actually, you see how that's how they understand the message as well. So I do think that Iran, on the one hand, has some very serious gains in the region. You mentioned Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. It's true. On the other hand, well, there is a positive side here. Iran has more to lose. And these gains, I think Iran knows that if it pushes the nuclear question to, let's say, decision point, it might lose actually all the other gains in the other arenas.
But you mentioned Lebanon, where Iran is clearly losing more and more influence because of Hezbollah's boldness within that country. And this boldness obviously forces it now to scale back from Iranian involvement and trying to show a more local Lebanese sphere from its policy perspective. Iraq, there's been bombings next to the Iranian embassy. There's been plenty of riots in the streets, and we hear people in the streets calling for the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, something that was not expected just several months ago. Yemen, there is an agreement between the central government of Yemen and the southern government, lowering the flames to a certain degree, all of it countering Iranian inspirations or aspirations, for that matter, to dominate this region from its perspective.
Yeah, I agree with everything you've said, but I think in the greater scheme of things, this is one step back after 3-4 steps ahead. So in other words, Iran's influence in Syria, for example, is much larger and runs deeper than what we hear about on the news. Just to give you a small example, you hear about missiles Israel and others maybe in the region have struck time and again, Iranian weapons, etc. This is true, but Iran still has dua or proselytizers working very hard in Syria to turn more and more people towards Shiism. So Iran looks 10, 15 years from now, not about the next couple of days. And I think it sees a region that's more Shiite than we know it, and definitely than what we did know it 10 or 20 years ago.
Dr. Mancharov, Israel has been the most vocal about its actions in the effort to thwart the Islamic Republic physically, militarily, in the field, whether it is in Iraq or Syria or Lebanon or the Gaza Strip, or some may say even in Yemen. There have been some reports. To what degree is Iran looking towards Israel, considering also the statements that were made by various generals in Israel in the last couple of weeks with regard to potentially having a frontal confrontation with the Islamic Republic in the near future?
It might be. We see Soleimani in the recent months that he became more risky and encouraged to take actions directly against Israel. In the recent years, they lied to their people. They claimed that they killed 70 Israeli soldiers in the Golan Heights, that they bombed military facilities in the Golan Heights. Now we see actions. We saw the drones that they wanted to use against Israel from the Aqraba village of Syria, but Israel thwarted this attack. Now we see Soleimani encouraged after the American withdrawal, after the Aramco attack, and now he gets more permission from Khamenei to take such actions. I guess that Israel will not let him to do the first step. We will see the Israeli actions before that he would dare to do something.
Mr. Olin?
The flip side of that, and I agree with what Yossi just said, is that Qassam Soleimani, the head of the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force, is under personal risk. And he has obviously analyzed what happened in the region recently. He saw what the Americans did to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of the Islamic State. He saw what the Israelis did to Baha Abu Atta of the Islamic Jihad in
A
Gaza.
man who received direct orders from Soleimani himself.
and was trying to hide and use human shields. No matter. Eventually, there is some intelligence and operational window which opens for a few hours or moments. And if there is a political will, if there is a decision to assassinate, Soleimani understands that he is probably under someone's gunsight. So he has, even though he may want to be a shaheed, a martyr for the revolution, he may rethink his ideology in such a risky time.
Dr. Merchavi, closing sentence?
I think Iran is caught between a rock and a hard place. Not that I feel bad for it. I'm just mentioning it because on the one hand, it tries to have more influence in the region. On the other, in order to do that, it needs whatever sanctions the U.S. is imposing on it to be lifted. And there's quite a conflict between these two aims.
Dr. Mansharov, your closing statement?
I think that the central arena now is Iraq. The Iranian influence is waning. We see the Shiite militias kill, actually, the protesters, and several commanders of the Khashad Chabi were killed in those protests. Now is the test for Soleimani. We would see if he really can halt this protest.
Mr. Owen?
President Trump is unpredictable. If the impeachment circle runs its course, he may react against Iran.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Dr. Merchavi, Mr. Oren, and Dr. Mansharov for being here today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.